So good morning all. We are going to discuss today about primary herpetic gingivitis and pericoronitis. Now these are acute gingival infections. Well, in the last class we were discussing about necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis. We discussed about the various aspects of that. And in this class we'll discuss about the other two main acute gingival infections, namely primary herpetic gingivitis and pericoronitis. So in the first part, we'll discuss about herpetic gingivitis. And as you can see, as from the name itself, you can see that this is a lesion in relation to the gingiva as well as the oral cavity, which is caused as a result of a virus. And here the virus we are going to talk about is herpes virus. Okay. So here, these type of lesions usually affect small children. In small children, what happens is, as a result of these viral infections, the gingiva becomes red in nature. Then what happens is within about 1 or 2 days, we can see some small spherical vesicles appearing. And these vesicles, they rupture, it forms an ulcer. Along with that, the patient usually has pain, fever, etc. And this condition is known as a herpetic gingivitis. And sometimes what happens is, these lesions are, they just occur, even sometimes, they occur subclinically. And later what happens is these virus ascends into some sensory ganglion. And probably in later life, probably about 30 or 40 years, when the patient becomes really an adult, due to some sort of stimuli, these viruses get again reactivated and cause ulcers in different parts of the body. Okay, so this condition is known as primary herpetic gingivitis, and this is what we are going to discuss in today's class. Now, this is caused as a result of herpes simplex virus 1. You have different types of HSV or herpes simplex virus, and here the virus in question, or the virus that causes this particular disorder, is the HSV1 virus. And as I told you before, this occurs in very young children. So mainly in infants and children that are younger than 6 years. That is where you find this herpetic gingivitis. But that doesn't mean that it occurs only in young children, but in later on in life, in adolescence or in adult life also, this occurs. But when it occurs in adults or adolescents, usually the first infection, that is the primary infection that has occurred, was an asymptomatic one. So as a child, this infection would have occurred, but that would have been an asymptomatic one. Okay. And after the primary infections, what happens is this virus ascends through the sensory and the autonomic nerves, and it will persist as latent herpes simplex virus and will go and innervate the area where that neuron innervates or where that sensory ganglia innervates. So this condition is known as herpes simplex virus. And secondary manifestation, that is a manifestation which occurs secondary as a result when the patient is an adult or an adolescent, maybe as a result of slight stimuli. And the stimuli that mainly causes this reactivation of virus may be sunlight, trauma, fever, or stress. Okay, so these viruses may be reactivated as a result of this stimuli, and later on in life, it may cause different lesions in different parts of the body. And you can see secondary manifestations include herpes labialis. Herpes labialis means it occurs in the lips. Herpes stomatitis within the mouth, herpes genitalis within the genitalia, then ocular, eye, or herpes encephalitis, which affects the brain. So based on which area the virus has ascended and reached whichever ganglia, and depending upon that ganglia, whichever area that innervates, that lesion will occur in that area. Okay, but what we are more as periodontists, we are more looking at is, or when you look at acute gingival infection, is the primary type of herpes simplex virus, which is usually occurring in a young child, which is 6 years or less than that. What are the clinical features? Here, what happens is you may find that a red type diffuse erythema occurs. Okay, and diffuse erythema is in the gingiva as well as the oral mucosa, and sometimes the gingiva tends to bleed, and sometimes you may find varying degrees of edema also. And within about probably 1 or 2 days, you can see that small vesicles start appearing, and they are discrete spherical gray vesicles. And what happens to these vesicles? Within about 24 hours, these vesicles rupture and they form small painful ulcers with a red elevated halo-like margin with a depressed yellowish or grayish white central portion. So that is what happened. So initially the lesion is just, the gingiva becomes red, and later on you may find small vesicles appearing, and then later on, probably after 1 day, these vesicles rupture and it results in painful ulcers. Okay, and imagine this occurring in a very young child. So this young child means the student may be, the patient may be very irritated. Okay, and because it's happening in the mouth, it is painful. Along with that, you may have fever and irritability, and the patient won't take any food during that time. So at times you may find that these lesions may occur even without vesiculation. Okay, vesicles may not be formed in some of the cases. And here there is diffuse erythematous, shiny discoloration, and edematous enlargement of the gingiva with the tendency of bleeding. Right. So if it is not occurring without vesiculation, basically the gingiva becomes red and it becomes edematous with the tendency for bleeding. And whether you manage the lesion, treat the lesion, or if you don't treat the lesion, the course of the lesion is about 7 to 10 days. After 7 to 10 days, it automatically regresses. That is what you usually see. As in cases, most of the viral infections, it may act over a period of time, then it regresses. Now, these are the herpes labialis lesion. You can see that small vesicles occur. Now, these are the typical, after the vesicles are formed, these rupture and it forms ulcers like this. You can see, imagine in young children, in a very young patient of about 6 years, if we find these type of ulcers, it will be very painful, and this condition is usually, it's very irritable to the young patient. Symptoms include generalized soreness of the oral cavity, which interferes with eating and drinking. And usually these vesicles are, the ruptured vesicle, that is the ulcers, are very painful upon touch or with food or whatever it is. If it comes in contact with food, or if somehow if you touch or if your tongue goes and pressed in it, they become the focal point of pain. And because these patients are usually infants, there is marked irritability and refusal to take food. And along with that, some extraoral symptoms may be also seen. One is, there's generalized malaise to the patient, and there may be very high fever as high as 101 degrees Fahrenheit to 105 degrees Fahrenheit may be seen. And along with that, the regional lymph nodes also may be enlarged. That is, cervical adenitis may be also seen along with that. This is a picture, overall picture of this young patient with a red, shiny gingiva, slightly edematous, tendency to bleed. Over a period of time, vesicles start appearing, and within 24 hours, these vesicles rupture and forms painful ulcers. And along with these painful ulcers, you have fever. Then, along with that, lymph nodes may be enlarged and generalized malaise. So that is the overall picture of a patient with acute herpetic gingivostomatitis. And diagnosis is based on the history, the clinical findings, and what you can do is, you can take a smear from that. You can take a smear and do a culture and immunodiagnostic test. And based on that, you can diagnose. And how will you manage this condition? Management of this condition is, this is not caused as a result of bacteria. So you don't give any type of antibiotic here. So basically, your line of management will be to give some sort of antiviral drugs. And these antiviral drugs, the course of the lesion is only 7 to 10 days. So if you are giving the antiviral drugs, you will have to identify the condition and start as early as possible. Okay. Differential diagnoses include erythema multiforme, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, dysphametic gingivitis, or recurrent after stomatitis. So these are the conditions which you have to differentiate these lesions from. It is contagious, and but you know what happens is, you know, most adults, they don't have this type of disease, because you know what happens is, you know, the primary, some of them would have had a primary infection, would have gone asymptomatic, and at that time what happened is some amount of antibodies would have developed in our body, so you get some sort of resistance, and that is why you may not find these lesions mainly in adults. You may find only in infants. And by the time this lesion occurs in infants, you know, antibodies against this virus develops, and later on they may not get this type of lesion. Management. Now, early diagnosis and immediate initiation of antiviral therapy. As I told you before, here you don't give any antibiotics. Here it is a viral infection, so you are going to give antivirals, and the drug of choice here is called as acyclovir. Okay, and you have to know the dosage of this. Usually, this is going to be a child patient. So the dosage you are going to give is 15 milligram per kilogram body weight. And you don't give it 1, 2, 3, or 4 times. You give it 5 times daily for a period of 7 days. So this is the dosage. You should all know the dosage. Okay? Acyclovir, 15 milligram per kilogram body weight, 5 times daily for a period of 7 days. And along with that, you know, you can take care of the extraoral symptoms. You know, sometimes, you know, the fever you can take care of by giving some sort of anti-inflammatory drugs, antipyretic drugs can be given. And then, you know, it's usually you have ulcers. So that will be very painful. So you can give some topical anesthetic agent to reduce the pain there. And, and basically, if there is gingival inflammation and bleeding also, you can remove all the plaque and food debris so that the irritation is reduced. And if it is having some sort of severe immunocompromised, if it's an immunocompromised patient or some severe lymphadenitis is there, then probably you can supplement antibiotics also alongside this, okay, to reduce that secondary infection. So that is how you manage this acute herpetic gingivitis. And a type of herpetic gingivitis that occur to a clinician's finger, okay, a dentist's finger or a doctor's finger, you call it as herpetic diplo. So that is all about acute herpetic gingivitis. So we are discussing a large chapter, that is acute gingival infection. In the last class, we discussed about necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis. That is commonly asked as as an essay question. Now, this also can be asked as an essay, has been asked, or it can be asked as a short note for you. Right? So you have to know which is the virus that is causing it, what are the clinical features associated with, what are the extraoral features that you may find, what is the differential diagnosis, how to diagnose this condition, and then how to manage this condition. So that is what you have to know about acute herpetic gingivitis. Now we'll go to the next part, the last part of acute gingival infections, known as pericoronitis. Pericoronitis is, I think, some of you probably at the age of about 18 to 20 years, some of you would have had this lesion. Pericoronitis is nothing but it's inflammation of the gingiva in relation to a partially erupting tooth. Okay, what happens is, you know, nowadays, you know, you may find a lot of impacted teeth, especially the mandibular molars. And while this is erupting, sometimes it may be slightly impacted also. The gingiva is over that erupting or the partially erupted tooth, that they become inflamed and they may get infected, and that condition is known as pericoronitis. Okay. Now we'll find out what is the reason for this and how we are going to manage this pericoronitis. So pericoronitis refers to inflammation of the gingiva in relation to the crown of an incompletely erupted tooth. So as you know, as I already told, the mandibular third molar area is the most commonly. It can occur in relation to any teeth that is erupting, but in life or when you look in practice, you may find that in the mandibular third molar are the most common areas where you may find pericoronitis. And the condition may be acute, subacute, or a chronic type of condition. Now, depending upon the severity of the gingival issue. So it is seen around the partially impacted third molar. What really happens here is, you may find a space between the gingiva that is covering this partially erupting tooth. Okay, so you have the gingiva, then you have the teeth. So there will be a small space between that gingiva and the partial and that erupting tooth, and that space is called as operculum. Okay, you should know that name. That space is called as operculum. So in this operculum, what happens is this food debris and bacteria get entrapped. Whatever food you take, sometimes that will get entrapped within that. And this food debris and bacteria will cause inflammation of that gingiva from the inner aspect of the gingiva. Understood? So even in patients with no clinical signs of pain, the flap, that pericoronal flap, or in that operculum, the food debris get depressed, and that flap is actually chronically inflamed. You understand that? So what happens when slowly that overlying gingiva get inflamed? Slowly it becomes edematous, and slowly its size increases. And when its size increases, what happens? The patient will close his mouth. When the patient closes his mouth, what happens? The upper molar will come and hit the gingiva, and it will traumatize this gingiva. And this condition aggravates. It becomes secondly infected. It can grow infected, and it can become an abscess. So that condition is known as an acute pericoronal abscess. Now, in acute infection, what happens is there is fluid and cellular exudate, which increases the bulk of the flap. And when the size or the bulk of the flap occurs, it interferes with the complete closure of jaws. And it is traumatized by occlusion, which aggravates the condition. So what happens initially is you have a partially erupting tooth. Over that, there is a gingiva covering. And in the space between this gingiva and the erupting tooth, you find a space called as operculum. In this operculum, the food debris and bacteria gets entrapped. And the patient, even if he brushes, he won't be able to remove that food debris from there. Okay, so that gets putrefied there, and the inner aspect of the flap will get infected and ulcerated. And as it becomes infected and ulcerated, the edematous component within the gingiva becomes more, and this flap, this flap or gingiva, part of the gingiva becomes enlarged in size. And when the patient closes his mouth, the upper teeth is going to hit this gingiva and gets aggravated. It ulcerates and an infection starts there. Okay, and as a result, what is the picture that you get? The resultant picture is a red, swollen, suppurating lesion that is exquisitely tender with pain radiating to the ear, throat, and floor of the mouth. What happens is, you have a severe infection in relation to this angle of the mouth. Okay, patient won't be able to open his mouth. The patient is having trismus. The patient can't swallow his food. Okay, and extremely painful. There is an abscess, and you have pain radiating to the ear, throat, and floor of the mouth. So this condition is known as acute pericoronal abscess. Now this is what we are talking about. Now here you can see this is the third molar. So you have a gingiva that is part of this gingiva that overlies this erupting tooth. So this space between this gingiva and the tooth, that is known as the operculum. So this food and other debris gets entrapped with the bacteria, gets entrapped under this flap, and the inner aspect of this gingiva gets ulcerated. So as it gets ulcerated, this area, even if patient tends to brush, you may not be able to remove the all food that is get entrapped between this area. So when this gets entrapped and infected, what happens? the size of this enlarge. And when the patient closes the mouth, the upper molar will come and hit this. And this will ulcerate this area and this will result in infection here. And this infection can spread distally, punctally, lingually, down to the floor of the mouth, etc. And it's a resultant picture is very painful picture. So that is called as pericoronitis. And along with that, the patient may be having a false taste, inability to close the jaws, swelling of the cheek in the region of the angle of the jaw, the region lymph nodes are enlarged, trismus is there, inability to open the mouth, and along with that, fever, malaise, leukocytosis, all other systemic problems also set in. So this resultant picture is an acute problem with severe pain, with fever, and with all systemic problems. What are the complications of this? Now, you in anatomy would have learned about different spaces. Now, here, this can involve different spaces. You can lead to space infection. That is the main complication of pericorneal abscess. It can become localized to form a pericorneal abscess, and it can spread posteriorly to the oropharyngeal area and medially to the base of the tongue, which really makes swallowing difficult. Okay, and all the lymph nodes, the submaxillary lymph node, the posterior cervical, deep cervical, retropharyngeal nodes, all these may be involved depending on how severe the lesion is. And this may continue to become a peritonsillar abscess, or it may spread to become a cellulitis and or a Ludwig's angina, which is very infrequent. In previous years, before the advent of antibiotics, it used to happen all these. Nowadays, with when the swelling occurs, we try to control by means of antibiotics or different medications. But when you look at literature and over the previous year, especially before the antibiotic era, a lot of patients would have died because of pericorneal abscess also, because the infection has spread to all spaces and it makes life difficult, right? So how you manage it? Now, there are three principles based on which you manage it. First is, you look at the severity, whether it is a acute life-threatening condition, whether it is a chronic lesion or a subacute lesion. And then you check whether any other systemic complications are there or not. And another aspect based on which we manage is, now we are talking about this is in relation to an erupting tooth. Now you have to evaluate and see whether the tooth is going to erupt or not. Understood? If the tooth is going to erupt into the cavity, if there is space, then probably you do a management based on that. Now, if you find that there is no space, it is an impacted tooth, then probably you will have to remove the tooth and then there, and the problem will subside. So these are the three basic guidelines on which you manage pericoronitis. One is based on severity, second based on systemic complication, and third is based on the advisability of retaining an involved. Okay. Now, what you do on the first visit when you see this patient is, you take some amount of warm water and just inject it beneath this pericorneal flap, that gingiva, what you see, so that all the food debris and all the bacteria there are removed. Well, what you can also do is, you can, with a small scaler, you can elevate that part of the flap of the gingiva, and then that area is cleaned with warm water. You can add some antiseptics like chlorhexidine, or you can povidone iodine, or whatever is there. And then what you can do, because the flap is enlarged, always the upper teeth is going to come and hit the lower gingiva. So the occlusion is evaluated, and sometimes, in some cases, in relation to the upper aspect, you do some sort of enameloplasty so that the upper molar doesn't come and impinge on the tissue. And if you find that the systemic, it has resulted in an abscess, or the patient is having trismus, or some of the lymph nodes are enlarged, or systemic complications are there, then you prescribe antibiotics in that case. And if there is an abscess, then probably the first thing is you have to drain that abscess. And one thing you should remember when draining a pericorneal abscess is, you can put incision in a different way and drain an abscess. Now you can put an incision like this and posteriorly, or you can it's a incision like this. Okay, buccally or buccolingually also you can put an incision. But here you put an incision, especially in relation to an anteroposterior region. You know what is the reason why you have to put an incision in anteroposterior region? Because you are mostly dealing with mandibular third molar area, and there is a nerve immediately distal to that mandibular third molar area. So if you are putting a buccolingual incision, there is always a chance that you are severing or cutting that nerve. So always you have to put an incision in case of draining and pericornal abscess in the anteroposterior dimension. Now, after the acute symptoms have subsided, so after the patient has come to you, you drain the abscess, you give antibiotics, then they recall the patient, and then probably in the first day itself, probably the patient is having severe pain, he can't open his mouth, so you may not be able to take even a radiograph. So after the symptoms have subsided, recall the patient, and then you take a radiograph also. Then you evaluate whether this tooth is to be retained or whether this tooth has to be extracted. Now, if you find that that there is no space, the tooth is not, there's no space for the tooth to come out, then might as well go for extraction. But if you find that there is space that the tooth will come into the oral cavity, then you can do a procedure by which you can cut the gingiva or the gingiva over the tooth, and that procedure is called as operculectomy. And this operculectomy can be done using a scalpel, can be used by using electrosurgery, or can be done by lasers also. And when you're doing operculectomy, you have to make sure that you remove not only on the occlusal area, but also on the distal aspect of the tooth also, the tissue that is present on the occlusal as well as the distal aspect of the tooth. You'll see that. Now this is the classic picture of pericornitis. You have this is almost a vertical type of impact. It's not an impact. So there is space for this tooth to come in out of the oral cavity, but you have an operculum here. Okay, so what you do? So because there is space, you are retaining the tooth and you are removing this tissue. So basically, you are going to remove this part of tissue that is present not only on the occlusal aspect, but also on the distal aspect also, or on the distal aspect like this here. Okay. So this is how. So not only on the occlusal aspect, but also on the distal aspect. So this tooth like this that is here, after removing the operculum, it is completely free and it's like this. So this procedure is known as operculectomy. So we have come to the end of acute gingival infections. Okay. Here we discussed about pericornal abscess, and pericornal abscess is nothing but pericornitis is nothing but inflammation of the gingiva in relation to a partially erupted tooth. Okay, when you find that it's a simple condition, but in some cases, the lesion can become very severe, and when it becomes an abscess, it's severely, and the patient there is severe pain and discomfort for the patient. So in cases, mild cases, what you can do is, you can just take a scaler, just lift that area, irrigate that area, and then if there is systemic complications, give antibiotics. Or if there is an abscess, you drain the abscess. And when you drain the abscess, you have to put an incision anteroposteriorly. Now, once the condition has subsided or the acute symptoms have subsided, then you recall the patient, and then you have to reevaluate whether you are going to retain the tooth or you are going to extract the tooth. Probably you'll have to take a radiograph then. Okay? Based on that radiographic assessment also, you come to a conclusion that now, okay, there is space, the tooth will erupt in the oral cavity. If the tooth is going to erupt in the oral cavity, then you will have to remove that tissue over there. And that procedure by which you remove the tissue is known as operculectomy. And this operculectomy you can do either by doing it using a scalpel, you can use your gingivectomy knives, or you can use your electrocautery or by means of lasers. And when you do an radiological examination, suppose you find that there is no space for the tooth to erupt in the oral cavity, what you do? There is no point in doing this surgery, because even if you do this gingiva will again grow back to this original position like this here, and again the patient will have all these symptoms. So might as well, this patient, we know that there's no space for the tooth to come out of the oral cavity. might as well go for extraction then and the problem is solved. Okay. So now we have come to the end of acute gingival infections.